Hello everyone, I am Thomas Marr and welcome to Mead 123. It's 123 because there's only 3 ingredients that we need to make mead. Water, honey, and yeast. It's that simple. So we're going to start out by doing a 1-gallon batch today to show everyone how it's done. And with those simple ingredients, it's really easy to find. So you can actually go to the grocery store and get any old honey. You don't need to spend money on really good stuff straight from the farm. That's always best if you like to go for the high-end stuff. But you can just easily get the stuff from the store. So good old honey from Walmart. This is a 5-pound. We only need 3 pounds to do 1 gallon. So you're going to have a little bit left over with this. You can get them in 3-pound bottles. You can also get 3 1-pound bottles. I usually find economically you just get the 5-pound bottle. And then we're going to measure out 3 pounds. So in order to start 1 gallon of mead, we need 3 pounds of honey. And I've already measured out what we need here. I've got my little food scale. And I always make sure to put my bowl on. Remember to tear it out so that it goes back to 0 with the bowl on it. And then you pour your honey in, and this stuff, really yummy. Nice and thick, just keep it in that bowl there. All right, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna use water. Now, for water, if you're on city water, I would recommend probably getting some spring water or bottled water. You need 1 gallon. And the reason for that is just because with city water, they do things to filter it and to treat it, and you never really know how that is going to affect the flavor of what we're making. Luckily, I'm on a well. I have really good clean water, so I don't need to do that. So I actually use hot water from the tap, and one of the reasons I use hot water is because I'm not actually going to boil the water and the honey. We don't really need to do that if it's store-bought honey because it's already been processed, so a lot of the yeast and the natural things that were in it that could impact your brew is actually been taken care of in the pasteurizing process. So we don't have to worry about that. It's really simple. Now, to put all this stuff together, what we need is a fermenter, what we call the primary. This is where the container that you're going to use everything to start your beginning process of the brew. So that is this, and this is actually just a 2-gallon bucket. It's in the paint department at Home Depot. So I went, bought this, and then I drilled a little hole, put a little rubber gasket in it, and that is going to be our primary. Now in this rubber gasket, we're going to have our airlock. This is one type of airlock. It's not really my favorite. What I do like is the S-type locks. There is no right or wrong to it. I just like the S-type locks because I can see how much it's working and it's easy to refill. These you're going to put right into that hole on the lid there, so that when we seal this, all of the CO2 being produced by the yeast is going to push up in through here and be released slowly without letting too much oxygen back in. That's going to help us get the flavors we want with the yeast. So we have our primary. Now before we got started, I already did 2 things. One, I washed my hands, right? For preparing food for other people, for down the road, doesn't matter. Wash our hands before we start making stuff. And then the other thing I did was I actually sanitized this bucket. I use what's called Be Bright. A lot of people like what's called Star San. You just fill it up with water, put a little bit of that in, let it sit for a few moments, and then you're going to rinse it out, and you're good to go. And that's just going to get rid of any organic matter that is in your bucket from the previous time, or if it's straight off the store shelf, it's just going to get rid of all of that stuff that could have been built up on the layers that you didn't know about on the inside, because we don't want anything to affect the flavor of your alcohol. When you're cleaning these, please don't use soap and water. It does kill all the bacteria and everything in there. However, over time, soap, especially with a plastic surface like this, will leach in, and then you get a subtle soap flavor to almost everything that you make, no matter what you do. So we always just use the cleaners that are out there. You can check out any home brewing site. They're really effective, they're really safe, but they're definitely the best way to go so you don't end up having any off flavors in your brew. So we have our bucket. This is a 2-gallon bucket, even though we're making a 1-gallon batch. And there's a couple reasons that you want to oversize your primary. One, if you're going to add any fruit to it or do anything else to it, you're increasing that volume initially more than the gallon of liquid that you want to come out of this. So you want to make sure you have enough room to be able to have expansion for that. So we start with a 2-gallon bucket. All right. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add 1 gallon of water. I've got half a gallon already. As I said, I used hot tap water. And using the hot water when doing mead is going to help your honey break down in the water quicker. It's going to really smooth that out so it doesn't take as long for it to settle into the water. And we've got a spoon here. All right. So when we have our water in, we're just going to gently mix the honey right into it. We have our 3 pounds of honey for the 1 gallon of water. And let's see. Almost there. There we go. And if you're off a little bit, just it's over the line for water, or you're, a couple ounces over the pounds of honey, don't worry. This is cooking, really. So it's, it's not exact, precise measurements. It's more of a general estimate. So now we have our 1 gallon of water into our primary. Now I'm going to take our honey. I'm going to pour that in. There we go. And we're going to make sure we get all that honey mixed in. Scrape that bowl out nice and clean. Nice thing with honey is you can always lick it with your fingers to clean the bowl out afterwards. Some of us never outgrew licking the spatulas from the cake batter. Alright. So all the honey has gone right down to the bottom of the bucket, settled about that thick. And what we're going to do is we're just going to stir this up, and we're going to get it thoroughly mixed in. It's going to turn the water to kind of a light brown muddy color, which is what we want. It means that the honey is all dissolved into the water. Now you can do this with cold water. It's just going to take a lot longer for you to be able to stir it and to be able to get it in. If we were doing natural honey, if we got it from a farmer or something like that, what you want to do is take your 1 gallon of water and your 3 pounds of honey, put it on the stove, and then bring it to a boil. While it's boiling, you're going to see foam start to come up to the top. While you're boiling it, you can just take a spoon and just skim that foam off the top, and then once it stops foaming up, then you can just let it cool down before adding the yeast to it. That just gets rid of any impurities and things that are in the honey. We see that often in period recipes. If you're going to add any herbs to what you're doing to make a methyl gun, definitely you want to boil it, because getting that hot water and that boiling time actually helps the herbs get their flavor into it. This is just a straight mead, nothing else to it, so we don't need to worry about that. So we have our water and our honey added into this. Now all I got to do is add the yeast. And what I have here is one of my favorites, Lavalin 71B. This is just a really good general all-around purpose yeast for wine and for mead. It deals well with high sugar environments, which especially is what you get in a lot of meads. Honey is very thick, very dense in sugar. And the way that it really works is that what the yeast are eating to create the alcohol is the natural sugars that are already in the honey. So that's what's creating your engine to be able to get your alcohol production out that these are going to use. Now, a lot of times you read the backs of these, it says, make a little starter for it, a little bit of water, and get these things sterilized if you're making bread. You really don't have to do that. You can actually just take this packet, open it right up, and dump it right in. All right. So now we have our 3 ingredients. We have our water, our honey, and our yeast. They're going to start working in there. But one thing that we want to do is you're going to want to let this sit for about 5 to 8 weeks before you rack it over into a secondary, which is another bottle that you're going to rack into. And what you're doing is basically trying to get it off of all the sediment and dead yeast that have settled to the bottom. Now we use something that's called a hydrometer that measures your standard gravities, or your SG. That tells you how thick your liquid is that you're brewing, whether it's a wine or a mead or a beer. That's going to tell us also how much alcohol is going to be in the brew when we get done. These can be found very cheap at a store near you. You don't actually have to use these. You can just use the time method. Just wait 8 weeks. When it stops bubbling and brewing, rack it over into your secondary and let it sit until it clarifies. But I like to know how much alcohol I'm going to get, and I like to be able to know when I can rack over. So I'm going to use the hydrometer. Now I also do this because I keep records of everything that I make, so that I know what my recipe was, how fast it got ready to be racked over, and what I get for an alcohol content at the end, because I'm always tweaking my recipes from the last time. So here, this is our siphon tube that we're going to use. We have our hydrometer. And the way that you do this is, we're going to stick that right in there. We're going to fill this tube up about 2/3 of the way. And it's going to tell us what our starting standard gravity is. And by finding out what our starting one is, we will know in the end, if we get down to 1.0, then we will know how much alcohol was in. Now your standard gravities to start with are going to be somewhere around 1.09. You want to have an end goal reaching of 1.0. Now I gave this a little bit of a twist, a little bit of a spin, so it didn't get stuck on the sides of the tube. And I'm going to read the side of this here. And it comes out to 1.08, so pretty close. Between 1.08 1.09 is the standard. It just means that we're going to be about the point where we want for alcohol. Now, if you want to know when to rack this over into the secondary, generally you can do it when it's between 1.03 and 1.05 is when you want to rack it out of your primary into a secondary, and I'll show you how to do that as well. You don't have to. Sometimes the yeast will get very crazy, very active, and it will just eat through everything really quick. And then what happens is within 2 weeks, all of a sudden you go to check it and you're already at 1.0. That doesn't mean anything's wrong. It just means that it's ready to rack over and you want to go ahead and do that. So at this point, let's put the lid on this. Make sure you got a good seal on that. All right, and we're going to set that on the floor somewhere out of the way. So you don't want it sitting in direct sunlight. You just want it so it's not going to be too hot or too cold. So I usually have mine in the kitchen here. You just leave them there so you can pull them out and test them, and then when they're ready, when they meet the right SG, we can go ahead and rack into our secondary, and we'll do that in just a moment. Alright, and now we're going to go over how we rack things over from the primary to the secondary. Now in this one here, what I've actually got is a Netherlands Mead with peach. This I actually have racked over once out of my bucket into this. However, it needs to be racked again. It just went from 1.05 to 1.0. So I'm going to be racking this over again. This is exactly the same process that we would for going from our 5-gallon bucket or a 1-gallon bucket into a carboy. The carboys are these glass jars here. So we've got this one here, and you see that it's still cloudy, but you've got all that sediment there on bottom. So we're going to be siphoning off of that and putting it over into a clean bottle. And then because the fermentation has reached 1.0, the fermentation in this is actually done. So all we're doing now is we're going to be waiting for it to clarify, for all the sediments and pectins to settle out and just fall down to the bottom before we rack it a final time to bottle it. So what I have here is my favorite tool, the Autosiphon. Rather than just taking a tube and sticking it in there and then trying to get some suction going with your mouth and then putting it in, this is much safer. It's a lot easier, less aggravating. This is just a 1-gallon Autosiphon with 5/16" plastic tubing. You can get the tubing at Home Depot, easy to replace over time. So I'm going to pop the top, the airlock on this. And I've got my handy dandy label on this. I'm going to go ahead and switch that over now so I don't forget what is in this one. I'm going to stick the tube into the receiving bottle. There we go. And then I'm going to stick this right here in. I'm going to keep my hand on the Autosiphon And that's just to keep it straight up and down so it's not moving around on the bottom or trying to float up. And it's actually going to set it right on the bottom of the jar. And then we're just going to give this a little pumping action to get the suction started. There we go. And you can see that it's already started filtering in through here. One thing I'm going to do to make things go a little bit quicker is I'm actually going to take this and put it in my sink so that it's a little bit lower in elevation than this bottle, which will actually make the siphon go a lot smoother, a lot quicker. So I'm just going to set that right down here. There we go. And we just want to do this without upsetting as much as we can in here so that nothing on the bottom floats back up. We're just siphoning it off. So as I said before, at this point when you're racking things over, we're getting it off of the leaves that are down at the bottom. We're getting our liquid over into the next one. Now, if it was totally clarified, I would be bottling at this point. But it's not clarified, as you can see, right? It's still a little bit cloudy. And so we're going to just let time do its thing, right? This is not something you want to rush. So this is the same for mead and for wine. You know, just let time do its thing. There are some different things you can use out there to be able to clarify, but they're not always the best option. So I usually find that just a little bit of patience and time will give you a nice clear drink, and also a great flavor. Whenever something reaches 1.0 and it's clarified, it's ready to drink. There is no rule or law that says you have to wait a year or 2 years in order for it to drink. It's ready to go when you want it to be at that point. You just want to make sure you've gotten down to 1.0, or if it's stuck at 1.02 and just not going any further than that, that's fine too. As long as we know the fermentation is stopped and it's not going anywhere, you're ready to drink. Now, things will have a little bit of a vinegar taste to it, the younger that they are. And some people like that. Sometimes it's actually an asset to whatever flavor you're doing. My blueberry wine actually tastes really good between 6 months and a year. And then the older it gets, the more it becomes like a port. And both are really tasting great. It's just a matter of what you like for flavor. But whenever you bottle something, it's ready to drink. You can go ahead and start enjoying it. If you have time and patience, you can let it sit and just, keep an eye on it. Crack open a bottle, see how it tastes after a while. I got some wines here that are 5 years old, and they're just absolutely phenomenal. When I bottled them when they're brand new, I thought they were absolutely disgusting. You never know. Sometimes they taste really good, and then as time goes on, they don't age well. That can be quite popular with fruit wines especially. They usually last about 2 years. You can get some that last later, but usually about 2 years is what you can expect out of a fruit wine. And then with meads, it really depends on the mead, but a lot of meads, I've had some really great meads that are 8, 9 years old. I've had some really great ones that are 6 months old. It depends on what you're going for. So as soon as you bottle it, it's ready to drink. Enjoy. So at this point, we're almost done siphoning here. Now we're talking about bottling, and because I'm doing wine and mead, I am doing your traditional wine bottles with a cork. You can use a flip top bottle. That's totally fine as well. I usually use those for cordials. With your corks, I like to use a number 9. A number 9 is a little bit thicker, so you're going to get a tighter seal. And what that does is, over time, if you're going to hang on to something that's longer than a year or 2 years, think about using a thicker cork so that it doesn't let any of that moisture out that could possibly happen with a number 8 cork. Number 8 is totally fine. They're easy to remove from bottles. So if, it's going to be a short-term use, absolutely use number 8. It's easier on everybody's wine corks, especially when you're trying to pull them out at an event. You're trying to pull it out and it's stuck in there. A lot of times it's because we used, an oversized 9 because we're trying to make sure we have a good seal for longevity. But go ahead and, use either one that you'd like. I just use number 9. That really just refers to the diameter of the cork. And when you look at your corks, when you buy them in the store, it'll tell you the different dimensions of them and try them out. Now, you can just leave it at that. You can just cork it in the bottle and be done. But I like to take it one step further, and what I actually do is I put wax on top of my cork and my bottle. Not necessarily a period thing, but it's one of those things where it adds a little bit of visual class to it. And it also will help keep your cork from possibly drying out as well. It seals everything in, but I really like the way that it looks. And one of the things that I have actually done, I can let go of that now, it's not moving around on me. So this here is a fortified mead that I did, and I have a gold wax on it. And what you do is you just buy those the wax beads. They come in a bag. Put it in a metal coffee can and put that right on the stove to warm it up. Because the coffee can you can just reheat over and over without having to sacrifice a pot or a pan to it. So then what you want to do is when it's warm, let it start cooling down a little bit. If you try and dip this in right away, it's actually going to be too hot for the wax, and the wax will just run right off and be very thin. So you want to just let it start to cool down, and then as it's cooling down, I just take the bottles, dip it upside down, and then I rotate like this. And what that does is it lets this bead of your excess wax grow right here, and it will drip off. And then as it slows down, because it's cooling down, then I can ease it up, and you get this nice, somewhat smooth top onto it, and a nice wax seal on it. The other thing I like about using the wax is I use 2 different color waxes, so that when things are sitting in my wine rack like this, I can look at it very quickly and know what it is. And by that I mean I have a gold wax, which I use for all of my meads. And then I have black wax, which I use for all of my wines. And I can look right at it and go, okay, my wines are right here, my meads are right here. And it just helps me very quickly get into the right zone of where I'm looking on my wine rack for what I'm looking for. So just a fun little thing to try out. You can also do shrink wraps. Shrink wraps are pretty cheap. However, what's not cheap is the shrink wrap machine. It's about $225. So I find that the wax is a cheap, easy way to go. It looks great. It's close enough to period that people really appreciate it. And these make really great gifts. So I hope you guys enjoy. Keep brewing, try new things, and expand from here. I hope to be able to try some of your stuff in the future.